Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this event. We're having some technical problems, so we don't actually have the slides, which is fine. We can power on without them and just get the conversation going, because it's an important conversation on multi-level action and the ambition loop, implementing the Glasgow Climate Pact to keep 1.5 alive. My name's Helen Clarkson. I'm Chief Exec of the Climate Group, and it's great to be with you all here today. So at Climate Group, our mission is to drive climate action fast. So we're all about acceleration. And we do that by bringing together networks of businesses and governments that have commitments at the center. And we use those commitments to drive change in markets and with policymakers. And in the run-up to COP26, we were pleased to be working with the COP26 Presidency on initiatives such as the Route Zero campaign, helping to deliver on the Glasgow Climate Pact. Of course, one of our really important networks is the Under2 Coalition. This is one of the biggest global coalitions. It's of state and regional governments, over 200 governments committed, and as Secretariat, we work to bring those governments together around their ambitious goals. And for the Under2 Coalition, science-aligned goals and climate ambition are really that key to setting the standard for leadership. The Under2 Coalition's foundational Global Climate Leadership Memorandum of Understanding holds state, regional and provincial signatories to 1.5 degrees C aligned ambitions and a collective journey to net zero emissions by 2050. We know that we must halve emissions by 2030, and that's why at the last COP and at this COP, we've been talking about that shift from ambition to action. We talk about this as the climate decade. And one of the ways that this can happen is through what's been termed the ambition loop. This is that positive feedback loop in which bold government policies and private sector leadership reinforce one another and together take climate action to the next level. So I'm the host for today, and it's really great to be with you all here. So let's start the conversation by welcoming Alok Sharma, the President for COP26, who's going to reflect on the role of non-state actors at COP26 in driving ambition and implementing the Glasgow Climate Pact. COP President.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you for inviting me today. So friends, great to see you. We are over halfway through COP27. You've all still got energy. Which is great, and we need to keep this going until the end. I want to start by thanking the Climate Group and, of course, the Under2 Coalition for co-hosting this event with us, and actually for all the support they've provided throughout our COP26 presidency as well. We're very grateful. So what we're here to discuss today is what we refer to as the ambition loop. And this is a phrase that's designed to capture the possibility of all of us coming together. So that's governments at a national level, governments at a subnational level, businesses, civil society, and ultimately having this virtuous circle where we push each other to go further and faster. And that's what this discussion is all about. And look, I don't need to tell you, you're all experts in your field, I don't need to tell you just how urgent the situation is. I mean, you'll have heard during this past week from representatives from the Pakistan government, from the Nigerian government, both facing recent very severe climatic events. And this year, we've had the worst drought in 500 years in Europe, the worst drought in over 1,000 years in the US, the worst drought ever in China. I mean, parts of the Yangtze River literally drying up. And we see this literally every day. There is some other climatic event which just tells us that we need to act now. I think in Glasgow, going into Glasgow, we did see this ambition coming together. I had an opportunity to visit in this role over 50 countries, and everywhere I went to, whether I spoke to government or I spoke to business or I spoke to civil society, they all recognize that climate change was an issue that was impacting their populations, and that's why we needed to act. And frankly, that's why I believe, even in very difficult geopolitics, we managed to get almost 200 countries to come together in Glasgow and forge the Glasgow Climate Pact. And business and finance showed up in force, which was great. And they made commitments on money, funding, climate commitments. And also, I want to pay particular tribute to civil society and youth. When we took on COP26, we set up a civil society and youth advisory group. And they worked with us, and they challenged us. And it wasn't always a comfortable discussion, quite frankly. But they kept challenging us to be more ambitious going into COP26. I want to thank them very much for that. And as I said, I do think the Glasgow Climate Pact is a testament of what is possible when all of us work together with one ambition. The work we did in COP26 did make the ambition loop, I believe, more powerful. It instilled, particularly with the closing of the Paris Rulebook, more transparency in the system, more accountability, and of course also formalizing the role of non-party stakeholders throughout the process. So, what has happened in terms of business, what has happened in terms of finance? Well, you're seeing trillions of dollars committing to net zero by 2050 from the private sector. But by the way, I just want to acknowledge the fact we need to make sure that when those financial institutions or the corporates, and there are thousands of them who have committed to net zero, when they do so on science-based targets. They do so by setting out near-term emission reduction targets, and they set out ultimately transition plans as well. And that's what we need to see happen. And you're seeing, over this past year, increasing acceleration of renewables, of green energy, of zero-emission vehicles, and that's despite the very difficult geopolitics that we've had this year. And I want to give a shout out also to the Glasgow Breakthrough Agenda. We've had more countries coming together, over 70% of the global economy committed to these breakthroughs, decarbonizing some of the highest emitting sectors in the world, and making sure that that technology that we develop is available by 2030 at relatively low cost to everyone. And there are two big asks that I have always heard from developing nations. One, finance, secondly, technology, but it has to be affordable, and that's what the breakthrough agendas are all about. So many of our fantastic panelists that you're going to hear from today are absolutely leaders in their field, driving that ambition loop at every section of society, and that's whether that's from the Climate Groups Network, building up the Under2 Coalition, or to Climate Trace's work to trace emissions and drive accountability. I also want to give a shout out to the high-level champions, the UN high-level champions. I don't know, is Nigel in the room? No, I'm sure he's busy at another event. But Nigel Topping did great work. Actually, he's become a very good friend as well. But he did great work on driving this agenda forward. Look, I think we've seen progress, of course, but there is much, much more to do. We all agreed to come forward with emission reduction targets by the end of this year. We've had 33 countries come forward. Yes, the latest reports show that if you deliver on all the commitments that have been made by countries and corporates, we could be heading to 1.7 degrees of global warming. That's great, but then there has to be delivery at a government level, at a corporate level, and what we cannot have is any kind of moving away from the baseline of Glasgow and Paris. That's one of the things I've just said. I've come from an event where we had ministers from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, and the UAE coming together. And I made the point that here we have to reaffirm that Glasgow and Paris are absolutely the baselines. And that is something that I will be pushing on in terms of negotiations during the rest of this conference. So finally, thank you again for everything each of you is doing. The one thing that we are very clear about is that we all need to be part of this solution, and if we are, we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Alok Sharma for those comments. They're really going to set the scene for our discussion today. So let's move straight on to our first panel discussion on the ambition loop in action, multi-level perspectives. And it's my pleasure to introduce a good range of stakeholders from different levels who are going to talk about their perspective on this and how that's played out in action over the last year. So our panelists today are Faustin Munya-Zikibiye, the Rwanda Chief Negotiator, Secretary Karen Ross, Secretary for Food and Agriculture in California, Eduardo Chani, the Under-Secretary for the Environment in Sao Paulo, and Praboda Acharya, Chief Sustainability Officer at JSW Group. Please join me here on the stage and pick your favorite chair. Oh, yes, now they're working. Great, thank you. Great, well, welcome all of you. So the ambition loop is a positive feedback loop in which, bold government policies and private sector leadership reinforce one another. Let's start with just going along the line and giving us a bit of an introduction and talk through a time when you were able to use an ambition loop to really drive implementation of the Glasgow Climate Pact. Eduardo, let's start with you.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody. Very, very happy. Thank you, Ellen. I'm the first one to say. That's it. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank the organization, the Under2 Coalition, and all our friends, and the importance of this COP for us. I'm Eduardo Trani from the state of São Paulo, Brazil, and we joined our group in the Under2 Coalition, and I'm very happy, Alan, that I'm the co-chair for the Latin American countries. So during these days at COP, we're doing a great job altogether on subnational governments. I think this was a great initiative of our group, and it started in New York Climate Week 2 months ago. This work means that our task is so important to mitigate. And also, in Latin American countries, and here we are representing 60 different states from more than 10 countries all over the Latin America. We are all together for the same commitment that's Race to Zero plans. And all these state levels are aware that our importance is doing every day greater. I'm here with my friend from São Paulo, Pernambuco state, and other colleagues from other states that are attending this audience. And first of all, I may tell you, Ellen, that since we joined the Under2 Coalition in Brazil, Brazil is, as you know, 220 million inhabitants. We are 26 regional states. And now we have already 18 states joined to the Under2 Coalition. That's very, very important because we understood that for the environmental policies and for the climate agency policy that we need to do, we need to be all together the subnational governments. And we reached that in our commitment, in our agreement. The 27 states in Brazil are all together, and we made a sort of agenda for our objectives, for our goals. Today, I'd like to talk to you and discuss the first results we're doing, go into action. What means go into action to subnational governments? It means that we need to make our proposals going through our objectives. And as Race to Zero said, we may do, it's arriving a friend from Argentina, hello, from Santa Fe, one of our leaders. Okay? And I say that we are very happy because São Paulo state is a country. We are 45 million inhabitants, and we have a very strong economy. So for big economies, it's more difficult to make action plans to 250. You know that. To take all these commitments. And we did that. And today in COP, I'm very happy to bring, 2 days, we finished our action plan to 2050. It is online on public consultation till December. And we are discussing with the economic groups and also with society. People are very anxious to participate and give their ideas. But not only the plan, what we are bringing to COP also is actions on doing. In our action, this is a small pocketbook that we bring. Most of you want to know. 73 different programs on climate agenda for the state. This is a starting engagement, and this engagement will be much better with the directives we made to the plan. So now we are able, starting January last year, to put together the ideas, what is going to what is our objectives to 2050. I finish for now. Thank you very much, Ellen.
Thanks. Thank you, Eduardo. And yeah, I understand that you finished your action plan on the way to the plane to COP, so congratulations for that work. Secretary Ross.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I think Helen knows everybody in the room, probably everybody at the conference from what I can tell. I'm from California, and I feel very fortunate that we have had a change in our federal leadership, and there's a very different climate for us to discuss climate change and to actually do something about it. So I'm going to try to tie my brief comments into that. We have had climate goals that have been very ambitious for a state, as a standalone state, but we also know that with our 40 million residents and a very robust economy, we can help drive change and provide those very important policy signals to the private sector. And one of the ways we've done that is on our renewable energy goals that we have set, most recently on zero emission vehicles when we announced those goals 2 years ago. And so the role of government is to get the policy right, to give that signal to the private sector. And I'm going to go rapidly into one very specific example, because one of the things that was so impressive about last year's COP was that the week before, there were 108 national and subnational governments that made the methane pledge, knowing that one of the most important things we can do, and with urgency, and to get the short-term results that are possible, is really address methane emissions. California is the #1 dairy-producing state in the country. We have a lot of cows. Cows make a lot of milk and other things called manure and enteric fermentation. We had passed a state mandate in 2016 to reduce methane emissions from our livestock sector by 40% below 2013 levels. That is scary to the dairy sector, but they negotiated with us, and we made a commitment as state government with our cap and trade auction proceeds that we would be partners with them in the early actions by providing incentive dollars to hopefully prove out the business case for moving to capturing those methane emissions from manure and turning it into renewable energy. That took coordination across all arms of government, the Air Resources Board, our Public Utilities Commission, setting some goals for the purchase of that type of renewable energy and electricity, and to put some of that renewable electricity back into the grid. But what has really helped this take off is we also have a very robust low carbon fuel standard that goes even further than renewable fuel standard at the federal level. That's been important to make the whole package work. So with 193, a little over $200 million with announcements that were just made a week ago, we have invested in over 130 dairy digester projects. 117 of those are almost completed. The others are newer ones that have been announced. We are halfway to our goal on reducing the methane goals that we established on the manure management side. And I have to specify that because every country I know of is looking for the magic pill for enteric fermentation or whatever it might be. In our country, if we identify a product that can actually address enteric fermentation, we will have to wait for a registration project through our federal government. We're hopeful it will be registered as a feed supplement, so that maybe it's only a 2 or 3 year process as opposed as a drug that would be a 10-year process. But what I want to say is that the dairy farmers were frightened to death, and they have stepped into this space and embraced sustainability throughout their entire operations. So it took an entire sector of agriculture and has brought them into this with enthusiasm. We have attracted over $400 million by the dairy digester community and private dollars that are being invested in this. And we finally have gotten the dairy digesters to a point where commercial lenders are willing to do it so that we can shift to loan guarantees. Just one example of how that works. I do have to mention the Agricultural Initiative Innovation Mission that last year was announced at the COP for $4 billion was the goal, with UAE and the United States encouraging other countries to invest in innovation. They have announced just today they have doubled that to $8 billion, 42 countries, 275 partners, which proves if you have the policy and some incentive dollars, which we've been fortunate to have, it starts to really take off for scaling up. And we've been able to prove that on just one example, which is methane reductions. And it's been exciting to see that kind of progress happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Prabodh Acharya, can you give us the view from the private sector? Obviously, you're in sort of heavy industry, and give us your view.
Thank you very much. Before I give some example of how we are driving the ambition loop, I think it would be better to give an overview of who we are and what we do. We are a private company, $22 billion company, headquarters in Mumbai in India. We are involved in manufacturing of steel, cement, energy, paints, and logistics. What we do, we believe that we are supporting India's infrastructure to be built. The challenge is now, as we support the growth of India's massive infrastructure, I believe, which is yet to be built, is to decouple the emissions from the infrastructure growth, and specifically in the sector which we are operating, steel, cement, and energy. But with that, let me give a couple of examples how we are really pushing the ambition loop and trying to accelerate the journey to decouple. The first example, 2 years before, we formulated something called Indian Hydrogen Associations. It is a business-led associations to drive work in the entire supply chain of green hydrogen to promote, generate, and use to decarbonize. And that is where we are leading the cement sector and the steel sector decarbonization IS2. That we call IS2A, which will possibly drive the ambition loop. The second thing is about the targets, what we aspire. Like in our US business, we have taken a target to become net zero by 2030. In our coated facilities in the steel making, we wanted to be net zero before 2030. In cement and in our energy, we want to be before 2050. In the steel sector, we have set an ambitious target in the proper manufacturing setup to reduce 42% emissions by 2030. Why I am emphasizing this 2030? Because it's very important what we do now. We can always give big numbers, big aspirations, big dreams, and then we always, as a human tendency, we leave it to the end that some miracle will happen, some technological development will happen, and our objective will be fulfilled. I think that's what's happening right now, and that is where we are focusing now and then here. Let me give one more example. I think this is thanks to the climate group, which they have come with fascinating campaigns, and one of them is EV 100+. That means what we can do to decarbonize the transport sector, the heavy transport sector, which is emissions. And that is where we are becoming a founding member to support that initiative and to drive those initiatives. The other challenge, one more example I want to also give here, is we all understand steel sector is difficult to decarbonize and the lot of investment is required. I think, yesterday I have seen many forums we are discussing that. But what is important is that sufficient finance available for the steel sector to use in decarbonizing. And that is where with the startup company in the US, called SmartX. We are helping them to create steel sector decarbonization fund in India specifically. Why India? Because steel sector is going to grow in India. It's declining in the rest of the countries, but India it is going to double in another 8 years. So therefore, massive investment is required to decarbonize this sector, and that is where we are helping to create a fund that can accelerate the decarbonization. I think these are the examples which I could find as a business, as a private sector, how we are making that ambition loop to work and to accelerate. Thank you. I'll be happy to take questions later.
Thank you very much. Great. We've heard about different levels. Faustin, can you talk about this from the national perspective, from your view in Rwanda?
Thank you very much, moderator. I'm Faustin Munyazikwiye. I'm the Deputy Director General of Rwanda Environment Management Authority, and I'm representing Minister of Environment on this panel. Moderator, as you said, Ambition Loop, the experience of the government of Rwanda. Government of Rwanda placed environment and the climate change at the center of all the investment we are doing. We started with mainstreaming of environment and climate change in our Vision 2050. The fact that climate change is mainstreamed in our Vision 2050, all the key actors, be it non-state actors, private sector, they have to demonstrate how they are integrating climate change in what they are doing. On top of that, government of Rwanda to create the incentive for private sector to be part of this journey, we have created various instruments, financial instruments, which are helping public funds to leverage additional private investments. For example, when we came here at COP27, at the first day, on 7th, our President, Paul Kagame, launched what we call Ireme Invest here at Sharm el-Sheikh, which is a Rwanda Green Investment Facility. So after launching it, we have capitalized more than 100 million US dollars immediately from various partners. But Ireme Invest, Ireme, first of all, it's a Rwandan name, which means the quality. We are no longer talking about only quantity. We need also to look at the quality of investment we are talking about. We want investment which are having the impact. Rwanda is one of the least developed countries which are more vulnerable to climate change impacts. So when we are talking about quality, we mean the quality of the project. So the Ireme Invest has two windows. The first window is the facility of project preparation facility, which will accompany which will give the grant to develop the project, and from feasibility to bankable proposals. Then the second facility in the Ireme Invest, it is a credit facility, which is operated by our Rwanda Development Bank. So it's a combination of our Rwanda Green Fund, which will be managing the project preparation facility, and Rwanda Development Bank, which will be managing the credit facility. So this is one of the examples showing how government of Rwanda is putting climate investments at the center of what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you all for these great examples. Let's talk now about challenges, not to go down, but like challenges and how you've overcome them. Secretary Ross, would you like to start on that?
Well, the challenges are many. Can I go back to my plea about we're all looking for an enteric fermentation? The other challenge, speaking from an agricultural perspective in particular, is that our investments in things like healthy soils and all the work we're working on circular economy about, you know, byproducts and waste to energy or waste to compost, which then also helps build up our healthy soils, is that agriculture is constantly adapting, but especially something like where our goals for natural working lands as becoming a carbon sink will not happen in the next quarter or next year, is that there has to be understanding of farming as a system. And one of the challenges is we have short-term attention spans, and sometimes the money's available for something that can prove itself out in 1 or 2 years, as opposed to understanding the cycles and all the challenges that are in it. So that becomes a challenge for the investment in agriculture innovation in particular, is that it's a slower return, and sometimes it's lower, but it's very steady. And so attracting the investment that's necessary in something like agriculture can be challenging for that very reason. By the same token, we're talking about climate change, which is already directly impacting food productivity and making sure that all citizens have access to good nutrition. And so we can't let that be. And that's why this agricultural innovation mission for climate is so important, because we are attracting the ag tech, we're attracting venture capital, we're attracting others that see we can be part of the climate solution by sequestering carbon, by reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions, and also meet the nutrition needs of a fast-growing world population. So that's how I would couch my biggest challenges. I thought if there were little ones, I would have gone out and solved them. So I'm going to help all of you help us become part of the solution. Thanks.
Thank you. Eduardo.
As Karen said, that there are very many challenges, but I just choose some for the subnational governments. I think the first one we've been hearing, mostly in Latin America, is we need to go very fast on adaptation. We will do mitigation, of course, and our plans are here, but we need to act absolutely now for adaptation issues. I think this is a big challenge, because for that, we need communication, we need to put people together, we need to engage communities, and we need to engage governments. And for that, I think the second very important challenge is climate governance between federal, subnational, and local government. We are now the state government, like us. For every state of us, we have many, many local governments. We need to go very fast to them because they are suffering the impact. Most, the more poor countries, because climate impact to the poor. That's absolutely right with all what we've been seeing these last years. I won't talk about Pakistan. Everybody talks about Pakistan. But the third challenge, just to choose three, it's exactly what you said. And I'm very happy to be with the private sector who is engaged on doing things. In Brazil, for example, we're doing a lot of engagement with people for cattle. Big, huge companies. They're here talking with us. They're putting objectives to more 2030, 2035. And in our plan, we're putting a lot on 2030. We need to do very fast. What will be starting, that will be ending on 2050. So the private sector has to be very with the study of the budget of the government. Because the governments, all governments have money to put, but they need to put in the right subsidies, in the right incentives. I think the right and balanced incentive with the power of the private sector, that's the most important to make the changing. I think this is one of the greatest challenge, and we're going through.
Thank you very much. Faustin, would you like to come in there?
Thank you very much. Rwanda, as one of the least developed countries, the first challenge is access to finance. So to overcome that, Rwanda, through our Green Growth and Climate Resilience Strategy in 2011, established Rwanda Green Fund. So Rwanda Green Fund came in to be the only vehicle to mobilize climate finance in the country. As of today, it has already mobilized more than 200 million US dollars. And it is supporting private sector NGOs, and public institutions. The second challenge is the capacity to be able to develop a bankable proposal or to get a green investment. There is technicalities and capacity involved to meet the requirements. So it's one of the key challenges our private sector has. So to be able to overcome that challenge, we saw that having a green fund is not enough. So we established what we call incubator and accelerator program, especially for young innovators. We had so many young innovators, but who have ideas, but who cannot translate those ideas in the bankable proposals. So it starts with incubation. They incubate their ideas until it becomes a proposal which you can sell. Then after that, they start the acceleration program where they get also some seed money to do some detailed feasibility studies to unleash their proposals. So that's the second one. The third one is the incentives. Most of the private sector, most of the investment in the climate change, you don't get the benefit just right away. It's a long-term benefit. So some of the business community think that they rather go for quick wins instead of just waiting for 10 years or 20 years for getting the return on investment. So that's why we are trying to have fiscal incentives and non-fiscal incentives. So for fiscal incentives, let me give you one example. To allow Rwanda to embrace e-mobility, the government of Rwanda took a decision in 2020. By the way, that decision was very hard because we were in the middle of COVID, we were in the lockdown, to make all the electric vehicles tax-free. So all the cars, whoever wants to buy or to import electric vehicle is tax-free. And the chargers and other spare parts are tax-free. Apart from that, they are also for the energy tariff, they give them a special tariff, which is again aligned with the incentive we give for industries. They are not paying like a home or residential. So that's one of the example of fiscal incentives. Then a non-fiscal incentive is that the fact that wherever in our plans, Ministry of Agriculture, when is presenting their plan, they have to demonstrate how environment and the climate change is integrated. So it is an entry point for private investors who want to invest in agriculture, for instance, in irrigation. So those are the main challenges and how we tried to overcome them in Rwanda.
Thank you. Praboda, let's hear from you.
Okay, if I have to categorize the challenges, I will put in the 4 buckets. I'm talking from a private sector perspective. The first challenge is the technological challenge. There are some technological challenges to benefits. For example, we have set a target to phase out thermal coal by 2030 in our steel operations. So there possibly the renewable energy technology is an enabler to achieve. But when I look at decarbonizing the so-called hard-to-abate sectors, steel and cement, many of those technologies are in the formative stage. So when it will come and become a mainstay, so that is one of the challenges while deciding the ambition loop. The second challenge is the financial challenge. Let me give another example. The steel sector decarbonization requires almost $2 trillion investment by 2030, which is 2.5 times more investment than business as usual investment. If you would not have, aspire for 1.5 degree world, then possibly it would have been 2.5 times lesser investment. So where from that money will come? So that is another challenge. The third challenge is the regulatory landscape. It is still evolving. As a business player, we would like to have a level playing field. At the end, we must make a healthy bottom line. Now, customers demanding something, but possibly many customers are not ready to pay the price. So therefore, regulatory regime has to come to define a uniform taxonomy and make it level playing field so that the business can accelerate their ambitions. The fourth one, which is most important one I consider, is the change in the mindset, whether it is the society or it is the business. And I know how much pain I have gone through in the last couple of years to change the mindset inside and outside. Simple reason, the sector which we operate, everybody call it is hard to abate. I just don't understand why you need to call it hard to abate. Call it possible to abate, right? Change the mindset. There is solutions available. It is possible. Start with a defensive is not going to work. So changing the mindset of the people, specifically in the business, to accelerate the ambition loop, I think is the single most important challenge.
Very good. Is that working? Yeah, I really agree with you on that. I've tried to ban the phrase hard to abate, but I haven't successfully rebranded it yet. So maybe we need to think about that. We've just got a couple of minutes left, so I want to go along the line, maybe one sentence each. I think now Twitter has dead. We can't say a tweet, but that sort of thinking. Just a bit of advice to people here or others about how they take on this challenge. Let's start here and work along the line.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For more than the last decade, Rwanda worked hard to create a legal and regulatory framework to give the incentive to private sector and also to make sure that we integrate green investment. So my appeal is that Rwanda is the ideal destination for green investment. I would like to welcome whoever who has a brilliant idea, proposal, investment to come to Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We need to be innovative. We need to be optimists. We need to keep stress target to keep the ambition alive. That will be my closing remark.
Thank you.
No one sector, no government can do it alone. This is the greatest opportunity we've ever had to collaborate in a private-public way and make sure it is inclusive and equitable and will lead to the kind of future we know is possible.
Okay, I agree with them. And I had another idea that's, of course, very important, is to integrate federative intersection. We need more harmony between federal, subnational, and local governments. This is a very, very important chain, and we're doing that on the practice now. And I think this is a good example is Under2 Coalition with our team in Latin America, for example. I think we do very good response. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much. Please join me again in thanking our panelists. Now we're going to move on to our second panel on driving climate action and accountability through innovative tech. To fuel a positive ambition loop, we need accurate data. They're required to plan, deliver, and track targeted mitigation action across the world. So in this session, we're going to hear about the experience of states and regions involved in the Under2 Coalition States and Regions Remote Sensing, or STARS project. And this project is using satellite and other remote sensing data with AI to provide states and regions with a recent time series of GHG emissions data. And they'll be joined by data and technology experts to discuss how data can drive climate action and be used to ensure accountability. And this session will be moderated by Lekha Sridhar from Climate Trace. So please welcome to the stage. The speakers will be Amaya Barredo, the Deputy Minister for Economic Development, the Government of the Basque Country, Samantha de la Bella, Sustainability and Climate Superintendent from the Government of Pernambuco, and Dr. Sasan Sachi, Seatree's founder and NASA research scientist.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Before we turn to our amazing panel, I'd like to set a little bit of context. We've talked about this a lot already, but we all know that national commitments currently are insufficient to meeting the 2-degree target, let alone the 1.5 target, which is why we need ambition from non-state actors. And no group of non-state actors are more important or powerful than states and regions. So I'm very excited to be joined by 2 representatives. States and regions often have different political and social priorities than the national governments and have the regulatory mechanisms in place and can therefore be one of the most significant actors to drive climate ambition. In fact, climate commitments from states and regions in just the 10 major emitting countries alone can drive an additional 16 gigatons of carbon emission reduction per year by 2030. So driving that ambition loop and making those additional 16 gigatons of carbon emissions happen is key. However, there's always a however, data that is recent and actionable is often cited as a key barrier to driving the ambition loop. Because how can you set a target when you don't know what the baseline is? And how can you measure progress towards a goal if you don't have recent data that's constantly being monitored? This is why, and data gathering can be quite challenging and resource intensive, and we will be hearing from Samantha about that, so I won't take too much time about that. This is why we partnered with the Climate Group, whose own data shows that states that have an emissions inventory and a recent emissions inventory are much likelier to set an emission reduction target, which is why having that is key to driving the ambition loop. Which is why we partnered with them and 6 state governments from the Under2 Coalition to start a pilot project to use satellite data and artificial intelligence and several other innovative approaches to create a recent time series of data and drive decarbonization plans. With that, I will now start with our questions to the panel. Samantha, I'd love to start with you. I know that Pernambuco recently developed its first GHG inventory, and you did it in 6 months through the Climate Footprint Project and developed a decarbonization plan on the basis of that. What were some of the challenges you faced in developing the inventory?
Hello. Hello, thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you to Climate Trace, to Under2 Coalition and the Climate Group. It's amazing to be part of this project, STAR project. Yes, Pernambuco, that is a state in northeast of Brazil, have his climate policy since 2010, but just in 2019 we have our first inventory with the help of Climate Footprint Project by the Under2 Coalition. And this year we updated this inventory, giving the information by municipality. This year, we finished our decarbonization plan that have short, medium, and long-term targets for all sectors that give us a clear trajectory to net zero 2050. And so, to respond to your question, the main challenge in doing our own inventory is certainly collecting data. The data are spread in many institutions. They many times don't have the quality we need. Many times they don't arrive in time that we need. And sometimes we have no access to this data that we need to do the emissions calculations. Other challenges that we face is the skill team. Now we have to have a skill team. In another way, we will have high costs to have updated inventory on your estate. And the last spotlight that I wanted to bring is the necessity we have the participation of the main stakeholders in this process that when we build our inventory. In Pernambuco, we have a climate change forum, so we have a working group that help us to discuss, help us to find the data, help to find the better factors to apply, and we bring the results and all this discussion to the meetings of the forum so we can spread the information and give transparency to all this process.
Well, that's really commendable that despite those challenges, you had the inventory and you've made the first step. Thank you. Amaya, I'd love to turn to you now and talk about Basque Country. Basque Country, I know, has recently committed to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. Can you tell us a little bit about that goal and why updated and recent greenhouse gas data is important to achieving that?
Thank you very much. Thank you also to Under2 Coalition, the climate group for the invitation. Well, good morning, everybody. And first, apologize for my low level of English. Besides, I want to say that I will give more a political than a technical approach to the raised questions. There will be more technical views in this same table. Basque Country started already in 2022 to work on climate change policies, and today we can consider us among the most advanced regions in these issues. The Basque government is fully convinced of the climate challenge and the necessity of the new ecological transition. As a proof of that, in 2019, the Basque Prime Minister declared the climate emergency and our commitment to become carbon neutral and a resilient territory to 2040. The leadership of the regional government is very relevant for the establishment of ambitious objectives and the deployment of policies. In turn, our commitment with international programs like Net to Zero, Race to Resilience, or Regions Adapt help to raise the voice of the regions in international fora. Moreover, the ratification of the Paris Agreement and the validation in Glasgow consolidate the engagement of the Basque Country with the greenhouse gas emission reduction. We are about to approve our regional climate change and energy transition law. This law will be the legal framework to achieve greenhouse gas emission neutrality by 2050 and set the basis towards a more resilient territory, creating the mechanism for institutional coordination. In 2021, the Basque Country joined the European Green Deal for a more sustainable development, adapting into our territory and launch our own Basque Green Deal. Among our objectives, we aim to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 30% by 2024 and 45% by 2030. To achieve these goals, interinstitutional collaboration will be critical together with the support of public and private agents. Also, in 2021, we approved the Energy Transition and Climate Change Plan. This plan focuses on achieving neutrality, increasing resilience, and mainstreaming climate action. The plan to ensure that the ratio of renewable energies represent 20% of final energy consumption. As a region, we are advancing adequately in emission reduction, although the production of clean energy is great pending uses. Yes?
Thank you so much. Sasan, we've now heard from both our state representatives about the ambitious goals they're setting, the need for data, and the challenges in gathering data. C-Trees is at the forefront of innovation in this area. Could you tell us a little bit about these technologies and how they can drive climate action?
Thank you. So first, an introduction to relate my existence to what you policymakers and subnational people are working. I come from NASA Center in California, JPL, and I'm in the carbon cycle and ecosystem groups, and I have worked on the science and the technology part for the past 25 years, and spend most of my time also working in tropical regions, Brazil, South America, and also Africa. One thing I have seen that in the past 10 years has been game changer in terms of data and technology is this advancement in observation and computation. Cloud computing and observation has helped us now to really be able to monitor the global ecosystems. And this is not just for the land, but also for a lot of other sectors, such as emissions from factories, power plants, and others. So these observations are important. So if I want to summarize, I would say we have two areas that we have really advanced very much, and the data is becoming more and more and more reliable to be used for both monitoring and also adaptations and mitigations of climate change. One area is the area looking at the activity data, meaning in the land you want to know deforestation, degradation, fire, where we have in California a lot, and satellite data from NASA and space agencies, and also from private sector now is coming. There's such a refinement and granularity that helps us to look at every few meters on the landscape and to be able to see exactly what is happening. The activity data has become extremely important because this is allowing us to measure the emissions from land use change, which is extremely important. We are really improving the uncertainty on the land part of the global carbon cycle. Everybody knows the land is the most uncertain because it's the human interaction with them. Now this is improving. The second area, briefly, is the inventory. Inventory of greenhouse gases on the land has been always used on the traditional way in the agricultural community, forestry community. NASA and Europeans and Brazilian Space Agency, they have spent a lot of money in the past decade. Almost $2 billion is spent on 3 satellites. One of them was JEDI that was launched. Biomass by European is going to be launched in a year, and another one, NISAR from NASA, is going to be launched. This basically helps us to really quantify the carbon stock on the land, both agriculture and also forestry. And that's really can improve a lot and can help us also for those who are doing inventory on the ground. And it's very difficult. You have to do it every 5 or 10 year cycle. But now you would have the ability to actually do this thing in a much more rapid way.
Thank you. Following up from that, Samantha, Pernambuco recently participated in the STARS, the States and Regions Remote Sensing Project, and you received data that was developed using some of these technologies, which are satellites and AI. Why was Pernambuco interested in joining the project, and can you share any interesting takeaways from the results?
Yes. I think any state would like to be part of STARS, and we have this privilege, we have this lucky. So in the mitigation trajectory, each time you need more accurate, more updated, and more data to guide our action. So this is much important. How did I say it? The main challenge we have in constructing our inventory to have this data is collecting data, and I think the STARS will fill the gaps that we have with the traditional methodology. In our decarbonization plan, we have the governor signed a decree creating a committee and a system, a data system, we can monitoring the implementation of the plan. So these emission data are very important to this process of implementation and monitoring our public policies. So we have already the preliminary data from STARS, and we are seeing that this can help us to have more accurate and updated data in sectors that our data is not so good. So we have a big difficulty with the industrial sector, and we have a federal register where the industries put the information of the productive, but we have some industries that we have the data 1 year and we don't have it in the another year, or in some cases the data is not very consistent. So the STARS already showed that our data are underestimated, and because this methodology that we can count the emission through satellite images, and artificial intelligence and modeling, you don't need this information from the productivity of the industry. Other example that I would like to bring is about the fertilizers that we use in agriculture. This is, we don't have this information in our inventory because we don't access the information that we need to calculate. So the STARS already give us through the images, they can count the emission through that is given by the fertilizer. One last reflection about these preliminary results is that the STARS methodology allows us to have the information spatialized. So I told you already that in this last inventory we have the information by municipality, and this is helping the majors to plan the climate action, but this helps the state to regionalize its actions. And the STARS bring this with more precisely, and we can act more precisely too. Okay.
Thank you. Just being able to work with the state directly is always so valuable for people who are generating the data, so thank you for your views on that. Amaya, I would love to move to you and talk about how is climate accountability helping the Basque regional government better focus their climate change mitigation and adaptation policies?
One of the key aspects for any government is to have adequate diagnosis that allow us to identify the priority to establish adequate climate change mitigation policies. the vast greenhouse gas inventory aims to obtain valid and comparable data that help establish and monitor strategies for their reduction. Since 22, when the first inventory was developed, covering the period 1990-2000, regional greenhouse gas inventories have been carried out on an annual basis. The historical trajectory is this tools highlight the role on commitment that the Basque Country has assumed in this matter, going beyond the competence framework by assuming an elaboration that the United Nations only requires of the states. Another relevant aspect related to our greenhouse gas inventory is that we present the results publicly in an event aimed at all stakeholders and Basque citizens. The annual presentation is an exercise of transparency, leadership, and accountability as a regional government. Thus, our climate governance recording mitigation is built based on trust and co-responsibility. All the information generated is public and available in a web view, and it is a valuable tool for the local management. Our participation in the STARS project is another way to further improve our regional inventory. First, I would like to thank the Climate Group for the opportunity that has given our region by selecting us to participate in this international project measure greenhouse gas emission via satellite. We are proud to contribute with our extensive experience and lessons learned in developing bottom-up inventories to focus mitigation policies and the change experience with the other 5 participating regions. The STAR projects can provide very relevant information on how to approach regionalized emission inventories to regions that have not yet prepared them. The regions must use all available tools to prioritize our mitigation policies and be more effective in our contribution to the Paris Agreement. During the debates in which we have participated these days at COP27, we have seen that is required for subnational and decentralized government to specifically access data. For this reason, I encourage other regions to make a step forward.
Absolutely, such an important point, thank you. And we also really appreciate having had your feedback throughout the project. It's been really valuable, thank you. Sasan, we would be remiss if we left without talking about limitations and caveats from innovative technologies. Many of us are pinning hopes on innovative technologies to really be the silver bullet that solves any data needs. What are some of the limitations and how do we work around them?
Well, that's a good question. I think the limitations are, you can talk about it at 2 levels. One is there has to be a trust built in the data sets that comes from the different technologies. And that takes time. So therefore, we try so much to bring a lot of validation data set from ground measurements and even traditional measurements to help improve our data sets and build that trust. So I think that's one area. The second area is the more the data are adapted and used by the community, the quality of data improves. There is traditionally, there is a basically difficult for agencies to use very high-tech technology that comes from satellite or remote sensing, because thinking about forestry or agriculture, they love to be in the field to do their surveys and collect the data. If a satellite comes and says, here's the alfalfa field, here's the corn field, here's your soybean, they may not really trust it. So the more they use that and the more we work with them, I think that limitations gets removed. And there is also, as I said in the beginning, things are changing really rapidly. I think data becoming available. Most of the data that now comes for mapping forest cover change or fire is all coming from satellite, and everybody is adapting. Brazilians basically produce, maybe the first country that produced deforestation mapping, and the government has been using that data sets over and over. Other countries are following that. So it's getting better, you know, but like always, technology has limitation, but it's fast improving. If the agencies and people and communities use that more, I think that limitation gets removed.
Thank you. I know the theme of the session was supposed to be data, but it really does feel like it's cooperation again. So thank you for that. One last question for everyone on the panel. We've used the term actionable data a few times in the session, and it's kind of a theme at COP. And maybe this should have been the first question, but what does that phrase mean to you? And if you could use this session as an opportunity to make a public call for actionable data and cooperation, what would be on the top of your wish list? Samantha, we'll start with you.
Yes. So I think we need good quality data. We need accessible data. We need quality, we need accessible, and we need for all sectors. So transparency, I think it's an important factor to improve our action. And this allows us to have more robust public policies and allows that everyone's actions goes toward the decarbonization. That's not just the public. We need to see, we need to recognize which actions are working and which actions are not, to do the change that we need to do to decarbonize our world. So I think the information plays a main role in this action, in climate action.
Amaya, do you want to go next?
In our experience, the learning shift of a regional government is very relevant for the establishment of ambitious objectives and the deployment of policies. However, a lesson learning is that only with commitments we are not capable of establishing effective policies for the promotion of climate action at region level. It is necessary to have accurate diagnosis and accountability that guide us regional governments on the path of neutrality and focus on our mitigation priorities. If I have to make a wish, it would be to see that the local information that we generate from the regions in relation to the inventories is considered at another scale to calibrate the global tools with a local perspective. Thus, interoperability of data is critical. This information can contribute to international and multi-level climate action process with bottom-up data that may serve as a control point for the information that is generated in these global frameworks. Science, sometimes the global scale lacks the necessary detail and it is not effective to carry out some policies from the regional scale. I would like to ask for a greater recognition of the role of the regions. Yes. For previous.
Thank you. Sasan, over to you.
Well, I want to follow from her remarks. I think we've developed with the C-Trees, it's called ctrees.org, as a non-profit, where we brought most of these satellite data sets in an operational platform to, first of all, make it global, bring it to the level that it can actually help national, subnational, and local level. Even smallholders, anybody who has a hectare of land or less than hectare can actually use the same systematic observation. So I think that makes a big difference in terms of be able to compare and be able to implement policies on the ground. And this is not just for, sometimes when you think about remote sensing and satellite data, you think that is looking for policing the activities. This can really empower communities to have data. So I think that's one aspect of it, to bring it to the level that people can use and have relevant policies. The other thing, I think, have the data timely and available for assessments. I think right now, I think we are at the level that we can provide monthly data observations where degradation is happening, when the fire is happening, and that's important. It helps, basically make the data actionable. Last but not least is transparency. I think it's very important for us, who are the data providers, to make sure everything is clear, clean, methodologies are available, and people can rely that. And I think that brings integrity to whatever we are doing in terms of climate mitigations and other activities. Thanks.
Thank you for all our amazing panelists. This was so fascinating. I feel like this is a subject I've dealt with closely and I still learned a lot. We don't have time for questions, but please stop them and take their cards to get more information. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to you and to the second panel. Data is obviously the key in unlocking many climate actions and really driving this ambition loop. So as we draw to a close, I just want to reinforce how important a moment COP27 is. It's through this event that we've been able to demonstrate the progress we've made from last year. And today we've shown we're taking the Glasgow Climate Pact from a blueprint for progress to an actual pathway to reducing emissions. From setting ambitious 2050 pathways, tackling challenges such as the methane emissions from dairy, to really reimagining heavy industry, we've heard from stakeholders about how they're getting it done. And it's now essential that governments and business unlock public and private finance to achieve even more faster. And that means closing the ambition loop to support business action in key systems such as energy, transport, the built environment, food and industry, and vice versa. And by working together, governments and companies can make a difference. So please join me again in thanking all the panelists that we've heard from today, and thanks to all of you for joining us.